Elite Facts presents
10 of the greatest warrior factions from history.
10.
The Mongols had a mission concentrated in one word: destruction. They had a take-no-prisoners mentality that led them to conquer more of the world than any other empire in history. These warriors were in training since the early age of 3 years old, practicing in the art of horse riding and combat. Their main weapon of choice was the traditional bow and arrow. Sure, it was really no good in close combat, but odds were that they wouldn't need to engage in close quarters combat, as they would snipe you through the heart with an arrow while riding their horses.
9.
Comanche ancestors once said, "From the time we hit the earth, we are warriors." Having an almost legendary status, these warriors have often been referred to as the Lords of the Plains. In fact, word has it that the Comanche would fire arrows at their enemies while hanging from the neck of a horse.
8.
The concept of the Centurion was revolutionary for its day, as it was the first time in history that a man was able to make a legitimate living entirely off of warfare and killing. These warriors were technically officers of the Roman Empire, and in order to attain this position, a Roman soldier would have to work his way up through the ranks and prove that there was no one better to take up the role in what was, at the time, the most powerful and fearless military force on the face of the planet.
7.
A lot like the Comanche warriors, you couldn't just wake up one day and decide, "Hey, you know what? Today I feel like becoming a Rajput warrior." No, that was something you had to be born into, or else you could just forget about it altogether. When translated, Rajput literally means son of a king. The reason these legendary warriors are on this list is because they were literally harbingers of death and are still technically active as a part of the Indian military. It's been theorized that the source of their skill is derived from the fact that their homeland, Rajasthan, was located right on the Indian border, making them the first line of defense against enemy invaders. These guys are as legit as they come.
6.
These Persian warriors are known as the Immortals and have been active from as early as 525 BC, and their last known active battle was as recently as 1978, when they were a part of the Iranian army. The Immortals are a group of heavy infantry that stood 10,000 strong and always managed to maintain that exact number of warriors throughout battle. It didn't matter how many you killed, as soon as one died, another would step in. 10,000, no more, no less. This is also how they allegedly received their name, as they would just never die in terms of being a cohesive unit.
5.
The Aztecs were just brutal. They only had two objectives when going into battle. They wanted the land that the opposing faction had in order to exact tribute, and secondly, they wanted to take opposing soldiers alive in order that they could sacrifice them during religious ceremonies. In fact, war was such an integral part of their culture that when a new leader was elected, he was expected to stage a military campaign immediately in order to prove his worth. The Aztec warriors were truly some of the most ruthless warriors that history has to offer.
4.
The Japanese samurai are probably among the most recognizable warriors from history due to their combat style, weaponry, and armor. The samurai are known for dedicating their lives to the code of Bushido, meaning way of the warrior. The samurai were driven by honor and respect, and it's also noted that the samurai are, for the most part, a very peaceful group, as there was a time where they never saw battle for a whole 253 years, a period that was known as the Edo. That being said, however, when they do engage in battle, they won't hesitate to take your head off.
3.
Gladiators are actually a different type of warrior. Once again belonging to the Roman Empire, gladiator translated from Latin means swordsman. If you've ever seen the film Gladiator, you know that rather than being respected members of the Roman Empire's military forces, these Roman warriors were seen as slaves and lived out their lives not only fighting each other in huge arenas, but also fighting wild animals and condemned criminals, all for the entertainment of the higher-ranked members of the Roman Empire. Having sworn to live and die by the sword, the fate of a fatally injured gladiator was left to the crowds to decide. Few of these warriors lived past the age of 30 or survived more than 10 matches.
2.
Despite popular arguments about whether or not Vikings existed, we can tell you that it is indeed a fact that these warriors existed, and they're just as scary as you would imagine. Sure, they didn't run around wearing horned helmets, they didn't stink up the place. In fact, Vikings had almost pristine hygiene, and they were certainly more civilized people on their own land. However, they would still rip you apart during battle, as they were known for having a much more brutal and unexpected combat style when battling opposing factions, especially Europeans.
1.
So at first glance, you might think that the Ming warriors were almost the Chinese equivalent of the Japanese samurai in terms of combat. Well, for the most part, you're sort of right, as they not only had practical armor that allowed them more freedom when it came to movement during combat, but they also used a sword, known as the Chinese Miao Dao sword, that was very similar in shape to the katana. What set the Ming warriors apart from samurais, however, was that the Ming were one of the first militaries to incorporate gunpowder into their ranks. The Ming were a formidable force to be reckoned with, and they managed to expand China's frontier significantly. Not only were they ruthless warriors, but they were also very efficient when in battle, as they were taught unique first aid techniques as well as how to make their own food if they were engaged in a long-term battle.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more Elite Facts.